When rewriting a story, a lot of times you have to sometimes take everything that you had and throw it into like an incinerator and start from scratch. Now that does not mean you can't keep the skeleton of the story and go to the places you originally went, but it also does mean that you're going to have to incinerate pretty much everything that you wrote. Phantasy Star is going through that moment, and as a person who, did a lot of fan fiction and other things, and did my own D&D campaigns, all sorts of interactive storytelling and non-interactive storytelling, I've been thinking about redoing the entire story from the very beginning. Now, when doing this, I've considered changing the skeleton, the basic concept that the story is built upon. Now, we all know it's a dark Falz evil bad guy. Woo! Some mysterious other force is somehow good but not really known, and it's just like never is fleshed out. Basically, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. It's like basically a story that's out there that said we want a devil, but we don't want a god. Because that would be offensive or something. And we're just maybe having humanity as its own god or some story element, maybe somewhere in some direction. Who knows? But you're basically left with a pretty weak sauce story of, oh, there's this bad evil bad thing that just is evil bad and does evil bad things because it's evil bad. You're like, if anyone lived in reality for a second, you're like, that's not how reality works. As it's been told to me many times before, butt weapons just don't fall out of the sky. There's a reason. Every time someone tells you, oh, this was just a random case, no, there's a story behind it. You just don't know about it. That's all. You thought, oh, this was a random victimization. Turns out they knew each other. And you're like, whoa, happens all the time. But like I say, that's why when people tell you stories like that where, for no reason at all, they decided to just incinerate everybody. You're like, I don't think it was for no reason at all. And this is just a simple understanding of psychology of you have to understand something is a threat to you. If something's not a threat to you, you don't even have time a lot of times to deal with something like that. You don't got, as the joke goes, ain't nobody got time for that. They got a million other fires to put out. If they don't have to worry about you, they're gonna move on. In other words, you have to stick out like a sore thumb. You have to gain their attention. That's the whole premise of but weapons don't fall out of the sky. Because you're assuming that people have all this time to care about nothing. Right? They care about some random event. No, they got lives to live. Things to do. You had to get in the way of that. Somehow, some fashion, you placed yourself in their attention span. How you did it? Who knows? But the point being is, a lot of times, that part of the story is never told in real life. And that's why when you get these stories where they don't tell you that stuff, you're like, this is boring and silly. It doesn't relate to real life at all. You're ejected out pretty quick. So when it comes to this, that's where when you do a rewrite, you might as well fix these problems. So we're going to use a very, 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 very basic story concept. One that is thousands of years old. Prometheus and the fire he stole from the gods. Now, good stories are vehicles. They move you to places. They get you to think. They change you. They affect you. And the thing here with this one is that with this story, we have a chance to do a lot of moral questioning, which makes the story entertaining on multiple levels. So here with Prometheus' fire, we're going to ask the question number 1, is it right to steal from the gods? Now, that question when it comes to Prometheus is, was Prometheus right for stealing? Is stealing justified? Is stealing ever right? It's like saying, is wrong ever right? You're stealing from the gods, perfect entities, right? Things that, for all intents and purposes, have never wronged you. They've done everything for you. They made you. You see what I'm saying here? That if you can steal from something that is divine, that is perfect, that obviously is a perfect crime. In other words, you can never justify stealing from them. However, humanity clearly benefited from Prometheus stealing the fire. So humanity clearly benefited from a crime. And this is kind of like the thing of understanding that humanity is a third party here. In other words, someone else commits the crime and you benefit from it. Now you have to ask that question, is it right? For you benefited from it, but is it morally right? With a question like that, and exploring it through a story, this makes for a very good premise. So we're even going to take this a step further, because we're going to ask a lot of questions about stealing. Because what is theft? Is it just merely possession? So what if someone was to throw away the fire and Prometheus just scooped it up, right? Just picked it up somewhere, and then someone stole it from Prometheus. Would it still be theft? Well, because Prometheus has the possession of fire, you could say it's theft from Prometheus, or you could say that, no, it wasn't your fire to begin with. You merely found this fire. We're eliminating the question that Prometheus even stole from the gods at that point. Is it correct for someone else to take it from Prometheus? When is it stealing? What is the essence of theft? Is it now just conquest? What are we doing here? When does it become what it is? And the reason why I'm pointing this out is because when it comes to the rewrite, the basic switch that I do here is that Dark Falz is Prometheus. But Dark Falz stole from something that was not the divine. Dark Falz stole from the Starless. But the Starless are raiders. They broke a universe, or they steal from a dying universe, or a universe that's been weakened. They take advantage of it, and they steal the God Seed. So when Dark Falz steals the God Seed from them, as we're saying stealing, but is it really? Merely conquest at that point. Now we could say that because they did not make the God Seed, that they merely acquired it, it is not something that is theirs in the sense of ownership. It is merely theirs in the sense of possession. They did not create it, they did not craft it, it is not theirs. They merely have possession of it. Kind of like land. Some things, when we say we own them, do we really own them? Or are we merely squatting and then claiming ownership to hope no one ever challenges us? Once again, good stories, we ask these questions. So like I said, the basic premise is that Dark Falz is our Prometheus. Dark Falz steals the God Seed from another universe, but really not from, directly from that other universe, but because the Starless took that God Seed from another universe, whether that universe was collapsing, whether it was invaded, some method or whatever, I'm not getting into that at this point yet, but they took that seed, and then Dark Falz acquires it for his universe, for the Phantasy Star universe. So the very first game, when you are first encountering Dark Falz as just the Dark Force, and there's some other force and everything else, this is why when I say it comes to the rewrite elements, the first story has to do with just confronting Dark Falz, the princess, whatever. Avenges their slain brother by going after the Mad King, but the Mad King really was controlled by Dark Falz. So the idea here, more or less, might just really be easily worked out as a story just to get you into understanding how Dark Falz operates. As in how the original race that existed, that put all this into motion, operates. How the universe is controlled centrally by a force. And what I mean by that is Dark Falz is not in the universe. Dark Falz kind of exists on the outside and kind of penetrates back into it. Now this has to get into the Soul Gate that was originally made and the planet of Zion and everything else, but getting into all that, that's way more here than explaining the structures. But the idea is that Dark Falz introduces their power through this event, and that's what propels people to start maybe asking questions. Now, one of the reasons why I'm bringing this up and saying this is because when the next part of the story is eventually you get to a ship where they which kind of is what NGS is shown to be now, which is a ship that basically holds the entire quote-unquote planet on it. And the idea here with this part of the rewrite is that that ship was a prototype. In other words, this is how, I said, Dark Falz influences people. In other words, this has to do with pre-evolution. The idea of you already know where you want to go, and you're sending out certain, let's say, signals and so forth that will eventually reach certain races and planets, and you can direct their evolution to do what you want them to do. In other words, for example, think about it like this. Let's say we want a bunch of species or whatever to develop rocket ships. And then you start to say, well, what we can can do is kind of seed the universe with information about rocket ships in like lots of different ways, like maybe like showing pictures of them, or like sending out like signals that they might be able to validate, like decode, or dropping a rocket ship on their planet and they like disassemble it, or like having movies or whatever, tons of different ways. And Dark Falz like is one of these things that uses a way to influence other civilizations and planets to do Dark Falz's will, because Dark Falz is setting up to steal this fire, to steal the God Seed, and needs to put it somewhere where the Starless will not be able to get it so easily. So that's why when you have that one where they're developing all these ships, they don't know why they developed these ships and why they went this route and everything, and why the universe is set up the way it is. They're like sort of thinking, well, maybe the universe is this way because of competition. Like, no, it's all directed. And that's the point, that pre-evolution, that directed evolution, where the outcome is pretty much determined, but it's trying to get you to that outcome. So you're thinking that we're developing these ships because there's scarce resources, or something like that, and you haven't explored planets, where it's like, no, it's all by design. Dark Falz needs you to develop these things to be ready to house the God Seed. So maybe sets up the universe in certain ways, causes certain conflicts, like the princess thing and everything else, to get you to start building those ships, because Dark Falz needs that ship to put the God Seed in. Dark Falz is not in the universe itself. Dark Falz exists on the outside. So the only way Dark Falz can do things is through this influence and control. Now, it might be able to grant certain powers using, Dark Soul, but I'm not getting into all that stuff here. Once again, that's lots of other story mechanics down the road. But by doing this, Dark Falz builds that ship. Indirectly, of course. But once that ship is built, it has to go through prototypes and so forth until the correct type of ship is built. So that's why when it comes to this next story element, when Dark Falz actually does acquire the God Seed from the Starless and brings it to this world, that is, where we're at in NGS. So the idea here at that point is like, this explains what the dolls are and everything else. In other words, like, when the Starless acquire God Seed, they don't just get the God Seed. It's not like, oh, we acquired God Seed, plug it in. No, they have to corrupt the God Seed. And this is an important concept here as well. You just don't get a God Seed and like say flip on the switch and get the power out. You have to make it able to produce what you want. And what the Starless do is it cause the god to have nightmares. They basically harvest the fear of a god. That's what the dolls are. Now you might not think about it like in direct sense, like what do you mean by it? Like the fear of gods or whatever, like producing the dolls. Here's what's going on. Big overview. The dolls are basically housing the energy that normally would create terrifying monsters. But it manifests in this universe as a doll. Now, what Dark Falz did was have Resurgent Arcs basically build these doll factories which would repurpose this energy that was originally creating Starless, and the energy for the Starless, and having it create dolls that could be easily used for training. And also, when they died, they released that energy into a purified form, which would increase, the photon density of the universe. Once again, restoring the dying, decaying photons. This is why, millions of years after it should have died, it had a new branch grafted in. A living branch that could restore the trunk to life. It was able to get the water and everything else and started bringing photons back to the universe. And once again, we benefited from Dark Falz's crime against the Starless. And that's what makes this story more interesting, is when you ask questions like that. Is Dark Falz really the bad guy? Or is Dark Falz our Prometheus? Sure, Starless not gonna like him. Maybe other universes despise the guy. But without him, we'd all be dead. And now that's food for thought. And that's how you make NGS's story go from dumpster fire stupid to thought-provoking.